Good afternoon. It's Friday the 14th of April 2023, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
And we're also joined by Vanessa Beeley via video link from Damascus. So let's get straight on. And here it is, Arcturus. This, of course, is the fourth brightest star in the northern constellation of Boötes. And, well, what can we say about it? If you turn your telescope towards it tonight, you might just see this. Because, of course, we have a new variant, Patrick.
This is not just a star, Mike. This is also one of the names of a Greek god.
Well, apparently it is. The constellation is the herdsman, and the Arcturus itself is to do with a bear, apparently. But there you go. What can we say?
The guardian of the bear.
That's correct.
The guardian of the bear, or keeps the bear away. It has something to do with Russia.
Quite possibly.
Possibly.
Yeah.
This is great. My COVID has been upgraded from just Greek letters in the alphabet to actual gods. So this is a big, big move for the variants, and we're here to...
But we're going to say that the Independent takes the biscuit, Patrick.
Yeah. So here's the language on this is unbelievable. So the coverage on this thing is great. Arcturus, what do we know about the new COVID variant here? And this is what they're saying. This is a subvariant, one of 600 spawned from Omicron. How about that?
Brilliant.
I didn't realize that the virus could give birth to other viruses because they said it's not an organism. Anyway, it's 600 spawned from Omicron, from those nucleotide particles. So far, but seemingly no more lethal than the others. That's a nice caveat there. Has been detected in 22 countries, including the UK and the US, and has made landfall apparently months ago in the UK. And the reason they can say this is because they've extrapolated some old PCR tests from wastewater or something like that, apparently. So totally reliable, nothing to worry about. They've got it all under control, the public health teams.
We're looking forward to it, right? So anyway, let's get on to more serious issues. And the arrest of Jack Teixeira, is that how we pronounce his name, Patrick?
Yeah.
And the question is he the leaker? Because it's quite fascinating. This young man, 21 years old, arrested by the FBI. Let's have a look at the footage of his arrest. Arrested by the FBI at his family home in Dighton, which is in rural Massachusetts. He apparently, by mainstream media reports anyway, is the leader of the online chat group on Discord where the leaks were initially made. He's been charged with the unauthorized removal and transmission of classified information. He's going to appear later on today in a court in Boston. So the question is he the leaker? He worked as an IT specialist in the intelligence wing of the Massachusetts National Guard, apparently based at Otis Air National Guard Base in Western Cape Cod. He was employed as, this role, Cyber Transport Systems. This is from the National Guard website. So let's look at the minimum education that you require in order to get this job. You need a high school diploma, GED with 15 college credits, or GED. Do you know what GED stands for?
That'll be sort of an equivalent of a high school degree,
right?
Which you can get during high school or after.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And then when they, for qualifications, they're looking for knowledge of electronic and network principles. They're looking for normal color vision. They're looking for possession of a state driver's license. They're looking for experience in installation of voice data and video network infrastructure. Completion of a current single scope background investigation. We'll come on to that in a second. Completion of 7.5 weeks of basic military training and must be between the ages of 17 and 39. So what they seem to be saying is that on completion of a single scope background investigation, a 17-year-old, if we look at what that is, potentially gets access to confidential, secret or top secret clearance. A 17-year-old, in this case a 21-year-old, but anybody can apply from the age of 17. That, Patrick, seems like quite an incredible situation. And we'll explain a little bit later as to how this has arisen, but just to take the point here, these people are children, really, and they're not necessarily able to make a decision about what's in their own best interests, shall we say, or perhaps they're open to manipulation.
Theoretically, yeah, all that's possible, Mike. So you're looking at a 21-year-old, a rank of captain, which is quite a young age to have a captain's rank. But apparently, if you graduate from college, you can attain a captain's rank as a college graduate. So, he is young at 21, an airman with the Air Force Reserve, National Reserve for the state of Massachusetts. Okay, so it's an interesting profile. He's very young, as you said. And the other interesting part is he's been profiled as a kind of right-winger, a Second Amendment enthusiast, a gun lover, Orthodox Christian, apparently, or linked to Orthodox Christianity or something like that, posting racist memes on the Discord server. So they've built out a profile of this guy. The only thing missing is that he's an incel or something like that. So it's got everything. The implication is that this is a potential MAGA supporter, and believe that the military and the government are run by elite pedophiles, according to various reports. So isn't it amazing that in 24 hours, we know every single fact about this young man? Just like that, there's going to be civil and also military trials. So
so what is there an attempt here to almost attach him to sort of QAnon and Pizzagate type stuff?
Yeah, just a conspiracy theorist, this type of person, or whatever. So is he going to get a fair trial in a normal civil court or a criminal court, with the jury having seen all this derogatory material about this guy? It's amazing how this gets out so quick, isn't it?
Well, indeed.
Case closed. Judge, jury, and executioner. Move on. That's what they're telling us. Move on. It's all done. We've caught him. We know the motive. We've got a witness statement from an anonymous person on Discord. So nothing to see here, right?
So while we're all focusing on the young man himself, of course, let's just remind ourselves about what was in the leaked documents themselves.
That's right. So instead of focusing on Deep Throat, why don't we focus on Watergate itself? So let's look at just a quick review of these documents and what we know, or what we think we know. Pentagon leaks, the contents, generally speaking, details of NATO's military support for Ukraine, battlefield assessments, intelligence efforts, weapons and ammunition stocks, situation reports, analysis on other countries are included in there, among them Egypt, Israel, and also South Korea. Not everything in there is actionable intelligence. Some of it is just somebody's opinion within the intelligence community. However, here's an interesting one, Mike, that Putin has cancer. That one's dropped in there.
Well, I mean, this is a narrative that's been banging on through the Daily Mail and other trashy newspapers for 2 years now, really.
Yeah, so that he's getting chemo treatment. So listen, we've included that in there, Mike, because there could be a lot of real intelligence in here. There could also be things that ended up in intelligence reports that don't really correspond to facts, but they're part of the leak, as it were. So it's a chance to get some of this stuff out and give it some sort of official status.
So Vanessa, let's just look at one of these stories, and this one from the Washington, who's the source? The Washington Post, about Egypt secretly planned to supply rockets to Russia, according to one of the documents.
Yeah, and I mean, yet again, within the article itself, there's no image of the document that they're referring to. This article, one, it's in the Washington Post, as you pointed out, very tongue-in-cheek, the bastion of true reporting, of course. Again, said very sarcastically. Interesting, but again, it's the trend these days seems to be for these rather questionable articles to be written by more than one journalist. And in my opinion, the more questionable it is, the more journalists that are attributed to it. So this article already has 3 journalists taking responsibility for what's written. And effectively what it's claiming is that within the leaked documents was a secret document where al-Sisi is agreeing to manufacture 40,000 rockets for Russia to aid its war effort in Ukraine. And shush, don't tell the US that we're doing this because, the US considers us one of their allies. I mean, this is just Dr. Strangelove stuff. And now I've managed to speak to certain sources very quickly in Syria and Moscow, and both of them, I have to say, found this quite laughable. That Russia, one, would need 40,000 rockets from Egypt, and that Egypt would have proposed such an effort when it has effectively been very clear about non-violent or rather non-intervention in the conflict itself and pushing for peace. And of course, towards the end of the article, what do they start talking about? The fact that the US might dry up funding to Egypt. So for me, this is a clear beginning of the targeting of Egypt that I've been mentioning for the last few weeks, and will probably come if this story gets legs and runs. It will come through sanctions, withdrawal of funding, and further economic pressure on a country that has already been pushed into massive poverty by the West, particularly by the United States, and loans through the IMF, etc.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
So let's Patrick move on with some of the key revelations again.
Well, back to the documents, and also we can point out here, and I know this has been mentioned before. These are photographs of printed out documents. So this could have been a daily briefing, could have been in the military, could have been CIA, could have been a Gang of Eight, Congress or Senate, intelligence committees with clearance, could have been National Security Council. So you're talking about there's hundreds of potential recipients here. So again, we'll come back to this forensic argument. Where did these documents actually originate? Did the leaker himself print them out? It's doubtful, or it's possible that he didn't, that he got these images of prints from somewhere else. We don't know, and they even admit they don't know how he got these images.
Right, and the other thing, with the other potential explanation, of course, we should point out is all we know is that the documents appeared on a Discord server and then on 4chan, that they've apparently come on to the Discord server via his account. But of course, there's nothing to say his account wasn't hacked. So, I mean, there are multiple potential explanations for this other than he deliberately leaked the documents.
Or that they weren't sent to him on another platform or on a Tor server or something. So Thug Shaker Central was the name of the Discord group there, gamers, ostensibly gamers. We'll get to the gamer talking point in a minute. Then it was ended up on Wow Mao and then 4chan, and then was disseminated to another platforms, including ended up on Twitter here. So, but here's the thing. Let's look at the key items, the big ticket items. All of this stuff is on there. But what's really important, there's a war going on. It's a historic proxy war, the biggest ever in modern history. So let's look at the big ticket items here. Here are the big ticket items. And do make a mental note of what we're showing you here. Ukraine is unable to mount a spring offensive. Okay, this is after massive hype over the last couple of months that Bakhmut is no longer important, and wait for the big spring offensive from Kiev, from the Ukrainian armed forces. That's been the talking point across all Western media, Western politicians, and there was no denial since this leak began, Mike, that there's not going to be a spring offensive. Then suddenly it appears in the leak. Okay, so that I find that to be the most compelling point. Secondly, surface-to-air missiles are being depleted in Ukraine. Their SAM systems will be depleted by some date in middle or to early May. So a disaster. What does that mean? Need more money, potentially, right? Need more supplies. So again, the leak can provide a number of functions here politically. U.S. NATO Special Forces active in Ukraine, okay? Contingent of 100 plus. This is admitted, this exists in the leak. This is something most people have known, but it can't be said publicly by any politician without severe consequences or blowback. And also from NATO's reputational point of view, saying they're not in there, but yet they are in there, even though we know they're in there, and most journalists who are looking at this know they're in there. It's a way of putting it out in the public here. U.S. spying on the Zelensky government. Now, this is something that didn't shock the people in Kiev when they were asked about this in the last 72 hours. So again, no surprise here, but it's a way of putting this out in public. Zelensky orders attacks inside Russia. Again, this is a talking point that we have known and we'll show you, but that has been denied or is something that's not reported at all in the Western mainstream media. So those are the big ticket items. So this is what I think, if this is a sanction leak, if this is a political leak, I think these are the important points that the leak, or the Pentagon or the CIA or the Republican Intelligence Committee or whoever leaked them would want to communicate these in order to somehow influence or allow the government to pivot. For instance, we'll come back to that in a minute. So here, This is the sort of propaganda here. This is Michael Wise, a total hack from the Atlantic Council, former CNN, honorary member of the Levant Front terrorist group in northern Syria. Here he is. So we'll just call this deep state narrative priming. And he's saying U.S. officials said the investigation is in its early stages. This is on April 10th. And those they have not ruled out the possibility of pro-Russian elements were behind the leak. So they had already primed this in the early days. It's possibly the Russians. Okay. So anyway, job done. Next, Dmitry Alperovich here, Chelsea Manning, Edward Snowden, Joshua Schulte, reality winner, whoever this military docs on Discord leaker is. What is going on with our young people in this country that we feel it is okay to publicize highly sensitive and operational classified information?
How did he know on the 9th that it was a young person?
Well, interesting. Good point. Well spotted, Mike. And do you know who Dmitry Alperovich is? Well, he just happens to be the former head of CrowdStrike. They're the ones that validated the alleged DNC hack and that created the whole chain of events with WikiLeaks that ended up with the Roger Stone trial, which was thoroughly discredited after the fact. So the FBI outsourced the alleged DNC hack, which many believe was a leak from the DNC. So he is the guy. That's Mr. CrowdStrike there. So he's an interesting character that he would weigh in. Now, so let's play a clip. What happened? Something extraordinary happened, Mike. 2 nights ago, the mainstream media in the United States came together and agreed to no longer publish any of these documents without blurring them out. So let's watch this clip. It's unbelievable.
National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin live at the Pentagon this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Dana. The revelations have sent shockwaves through the Pentagon and the national security establishment, and sources tell me could be worse than the Edward Snowden leak because of the real-time effect on allies, their trust, and the war in Ukraine. Fox News has agreed, along with other news organizations, not to publish the leaked, highly classified documents, which were discovered last week. Details about the scope and scale of the leak remain sparse.
So the documents are already out in the public domain. The mainstream media have come together as a cartel and said, we're not going to show these on our platforms. How ridiculous is this? So they're coordinating with government, with the Biden administration, and together. And so what is this? So even though it's in the public interest, the mainstream media have come together and made the unilateral decision that the public cannot see these documents.
Okay.
Isn't that incredible?
The Daily Mail published 3 of them and then published no more.
That's right.
Euractiv published 1 of them and then published no more. So this isn't just a U.S. decision. This is Western media.
This is the rapid response mechanism.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So there is some of the later documents that were shown had the name apparently and details of individuals. But Mike, standard practices, they can just put redacted black lines over these, right, and still publish them. I don't see the problem. That's how they used to do it, right? But not anymore. Okay, so here's how they're presenting the documents now. So props to Michael Tracy, who's doing some great work on this story on Twitter here. He said, they're blurring out the documents on CNN and the New York Times. Just too dangerous. Your eyes will melt, and then you'll start speaking in Russian, says Michael Tracy here. And then he goes on, look at this. He said, laugh, LOL at Bellingcat. Totally an independent journalism outfit, blurring out the images of the leaked documents like they're pornography or something. So they're putting the pixelated blurs over things all of a sudden instead of showing it. Of course, Bellingcat, totally independent, right?
Right, so we're going to come on to Bellingcat in a bit more detail in a second. But first of all, the question is why would this 21-year-old have access to these documents? Why? Anyway,
was there a policy change?
There was a policy change. And of course, it was 9/11 was the source of the policy change. 9/11 is the gift that keeps on giving. So let's bring this organization on screen. This is the Markle Task Force on National Security. And they're all about a safer America through information sharing. So they gave evidence to the 9/11 Commission. And as a result of that evidence, things changed with respect to documents, document classifications, and the way that classified documents were shared. So 10 years following, in 2011, they gave a report. Zoe Baird Budinger is the chairwoman, So she gave a statement along with Jeffrey H. Smith to the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs entitled 10 Years After 9/11, a Status Report on Information Sharing. And this is what they said. So in hindsight, it's clear that our failure to discover the September 11th plot was in many ways a failure of information sharing and a failure to empower our best and brightest. This was in part because of the so-called wall between law enforcement and intelligence. Over the last decade, this is up until 2011, our government has embarked on a virtual reorganization. Substantial progress has been made in shifting the need-to-know culture towards a need-to-share paradigm in which information flows more freely, enabling greater collaboration between federal, state, and local agencies, as well as the private sector. And of course, many of the people working particularly in technology in government in the US, as in the UK, are private sector employees, outsourced, and so on. So the point is that the last number I saw was something in the region of 1 million Americans now have access to documents classified as top secret. And this is quite an incredible situation. And the
total amount of documents is in the hundreds of millions.
Right. So the question is, what's the point of classification of documents anymore? Because the other question, Patrick, that I have is, will this reverse that policy, do you think?
That's a good question. Or will this situation be used to rewrite that policy?
Right.
Very interesting question. I think we should keep our eyes on that space. But this is all assuming that he did have, he was given access to these documents, which we actually don't know yet.
Yep.
We knew he's allegedly had images of paper documents which were then posted on his Discord server. That's what we know. But the mainstream media has ran all right ahead on this story. Game, set, match. Everything's been solved already. They know the culprit. They have the motive. They have the witness. Okay. So Bellingcat, enter. So we'll just say under the general heading of spooks to the rescue. It's without Bellingcat that we couldn't have solved this grand caper, apparently, ladies and gentlemen. So Bellingcat's Arik Toller runs to the rescue. So working with the FBI, being the tour guide in the virtual maze, the Minotaur's maze of digital information. That's what Bellingcat's doing. Let's take a closer look at this. Arik Toller, that's Elliot Higgins' right-hand man, worked with the New York Times to uncover a trail of digital evidence that appeared to identify Jack Teixeira, a 21-year-old Air National Guardsman, as the leader of an online gaming chat room where the U.S. intelligence documents were leaked. Now, let's just point out, Bellingcat boasts that they recruit their people, their workers, their investigators are gamers. They boast publicly. They work with gamers. They're in the gaming community. Bellingcat is part of or comes from the gaming community. So isn't it just a coincidence that all of this popped up on a gamer Discord server? And Bellingcat is there to be the chaperone for the mainstream media and the public on this, directing traffic effectively. Is that a coincidence? Is Bellingcat an independent intelligence or open source investigator?
I'm going to ask Vanessa that in a minute, but go ahead.
So we'll just look at the coverage here. So this is look at the authors, Arik Toller, Christian Tribert. Both the first two guys are Bellingcat. You've got Malachi Brown and names that we would peers.
So again, as Vanessa was pointing out, here we've got six journalists on this article. So the mud doesn't stick to any of them. Is that the point?
Well, in the first ones are Bellingcat, so they're not. I guess they're journalists now. So the airmen who gave gamers a real taste of war. So this is the narrative which they're putting together here. It was Airman Teixeira, a member of the Massachusetts National Guard, and his friends in the group who somehow obtained the classified documents. That's the most important part, and they haven't got that information yet. They've got the whole story, the whole kit and caboodle, but they don't have that important fact. So that's why we highlighted that, of course. That might come out in a month or two, and this story might be radically different when the rest of the facts eventually pour in. Okay, and posted them on the group, so eventually spilled out into the open, et cetera, et cetera. And they go on here. So in the interviews, the Thug Shaker Central, that's the Discord group, So, yeah, a place where young men and teenage boys could gather amid the isolation of the pandemic to bond over their love of guns, shared memes, sometimes racist ones, and play war-themed video games. So that's the story the public need to know. They profiled this. Again, the only thing missing is the incel. Okay, beginning in October, Airman Texiera began sharing descriptions of classified information, eventually uploading hundreds of pages of documents, detailed battle maps, etc. His goal, group members say, was both to inform and impress. So they have the motive already. He just wanted to show off here. Here's one of the authors of this, interesting Christian Trebert. There, formerly Bellingcat with Air Wars as well, now at the New York Times. Forensic architecture, you'd see him during the Duma chemical weapons attacks. He was running point on that story as well. Interesting character there. And so one of the independent journalists, so to speak, from Bellingcat here. And look at the end of this tweet here. He's saying, this is our big narrative piece. That's what he's calling the article, the big narrative piece here. So just to highlight that for everybody, that's what it's all about. It's about the big narrative, and that's exactly what we've got. So that's what the public are meant to consume on this.
Yes. Vanessa, just before we move on, what are your thoughts on Bellingcat?
On Bellingcat Independent? No, I mean, Bellingcat is effectively now a bona fide mouthpiece for security agencies, including, according to George Eliason, a very good journalist on the ground in Ukraine since before 2014, including for the SBU, the Ukrainian Security Services. So, you know, with funding from NED, links to Atlantic Council, blah, 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 Bellingcat is about as far from independent as you can get.
Yes. Well, we're going to have more on Bellingcat a little later on when we talk about Elon Musk and perhaps what's going on around that BBC interview. But let's move on with this.
So just back to the main point here. So in terms of those big ticket items, focus on this one, the top. Unable to mount a spring offensive. To me, this is the most important element of this whole set of leaks, because this allows a total policy pivot on behalf of the U.S. and NATO. Okay, so what does this look like in terms of the last one too? Zelensky orders attacks inside Russia. That basically precludes any peace negotiations, because as Russia's getting attacked inside their own border, they're looking at this as an existential security threat. So they're going to want to move further into Ukraine in order to prevent future attacks and to demilitarize Ukraine, as they said in their stated objectives at the beginning of this whole war. So by continuing to mount attacks inside Russia, it's guaranteeing that A, there's going to be no peace talks, and B, that Russia's going to go full bore in the east. So isn't that such a coincidence here? And by the way, here are those attacks, drone attacks. This is June of 2022. TASS here, drone attacks in the Rostov region on oil refineries. So Ukrainian attacks here. So again, Zelensky here's another one, February 28th, Rostov again, oil refineries. So Russia's getting hit inside Russian territory. So, I mean, that's going to preclude any peace negotiations there. So here's the policy pivot. Let's take a look at this. Okay, let's call this the pivot. So this is what comes out right after these leaks were materializing this week. And what is this? U.S. doubts Ukraine's spring offensive will yield major territorial gains, newly leaked documents show. So again, this is furthering the narrative. So Washington Post is managing the narrative on this by basically allowing for a soft off-ramp away from this spring offensive that was supposed to happen here. And it goes on. This is the Washington Post's big push this morning here. U.S. gloominess on the war in Ukraine is now clear to see. They have a picture of an old, elderly Ukrainian conscript in the trenches. They would never show that in U.S. media or Western media before that. But here it is. Isn't that a major shift in terms of the narrative? For months, U.S. officials have privately conveyed their concerns over the course of the war in Ukraine. This is the Washington Post lead, one of their lead journalists saying this. Why hasn't he said this publicly? Now he's saying it after these leaks. So you can see this provides the off-ramp for the mainstream media and for Washington to now change pivot and to change policy on this. So, and here we go. In the public, they stress their enduring commitment to Kiev to resist Russia's brutal invasion, vowed to support them as long as it takes, etc. But in more candid discussions with reporters directly with Ukrainians, they pointed out a tougher reality. A total military victory for Ukraine seems impossible. That's the key point. There's no military victory in Ukraine. Now the admissions come out. Because of the leaks, the press has opened up on their narrative and said, maybe there's not going to be a military victory in Ukraine. That's the whole point. Now they can talk about it because of the leaks. And this is how political leaks are designed. They're designed to be able to drift things into the public so that it's now acceptable to have that debate. Whereas if politicians introduced it, Mike, it wouldn't be. Okay, so here, and it's covering, here's another takeaway. This is one of the elephants in the room. Seymour Hersh, Zelensky and his team embezzled at least $400 million in U.S. aid meant to pay for diesel fuel. Okay, the tip of the iceberg, according to Hersh. It's Afghan-level corruption in terms of aid. And so here's Hersh, another elephant in the room. This is the cover-up for the Nord Stream pipelines. So yeah, that's the sabotage for the Nord Stream pipelines, totally unaddressed, totally consequential. This could rock NATO at its core with Germany politically. This is a big problem in Germany. Again, these are no-go areas for the press. And then we've got a clip here. Now you see the pivot that we didn't understand from Speaker McCarthy. And let's play this clip.
I think what's happening in Ukraine is an atrocity, and I think Ukraine, not just Ukraine, the world has to win there. What Russia has done is wrong. In a phrase that I use, a blank check, I use that for anything. I look at every dollar of taxpayers that we would use, but the one thing I know that in Ukraine we have to win, because it also would save Taiwan at the same time.
Are you reassured now, and should President Zelensky be reassured that House Republicans are not going to stand in the way of more aid to Ukraine?
You know, I traveled with Kevin, Speaker McCarthy, to Poland, Romania. He's always believed this, felt this way. When you're over here, Czech, when you talk to, and I've talked to the prime ministers and the presidents of Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, what's happening in Ukraine will determine what happens in Taiwan and the Pacific.
So they've tied the outcome in Ukraine to China and Taiwan. So this is a repeat of the domino theory during the Cold War. Then this is what mired the U.S. in Vietnam for 10 years, was basically this domino theory. So instead of communism and capitalism, it's now autocracy versus democracy. And this is the new Cold War period. So they've committed to unlimited support for Ukraine, maybe not a military victory, Mike, but Eastern Europe is a new battleground. Unlimited amount of resources could go in there. How's that going to shape up? Let's take a look at this. Well, this is the Lend-Lease Act. And so again, Michael Tracy points this out. This can be activated at any time for the US. They don't need any additional approval or anything like this. It's already been passed. And this would basically open the spigots for just endless amount of militarization of Eastern Europe here. And here's the caveat. An interesting caveat in here is that Ukraine is exempt from having to pay back any of this to the U.S. government. So that's a caveat there, and that's been highlighted there, Chapter 6 of the Lend-Lease, the Leases of Defense Articles and Loan Authority, which Michael Tracy's highlighted there. That's on his Twitter account. Very good research by Michael Tracy on that here. So what does that lead to? If they're going to pull out of Eastern Ukraine and possibly withdraw there or throw the Ukrainian army under the bus and totally expend them in there to create a new narrative, which is this, the case for a no-fly zone in Western Ukraine. Is that the last card that NATO can really pull militarily in Ukraine? And that's the question.
It's a dangerous card to play. If it is the last card, that's a dangerous card to play.
It's a dangerous card to play, but they've played it in Syria. So they've proven that they could squat in a, quote, hostile zone or whatever, and no one's going to touch them for fear that all hell would break loose. So, and then create a permanent frozen situation there for a long period of time, 10, 15, 20 years, buffer zone, DMZ, no fly, take your pick. And so what people in the West view this as a humanitarian effort. The idea of the no-fly zone, as you can see in this image, it's equivalent to stopping war. And this is because only the bad guys bomb civilians, not the United States and NATO. So that's the implication in the minds of the West. So they could sell this very easily to the West. So if you want any more information on this, I did a really good interview with Kim Iverson, which is up on 21st Century Wire here, and we talked about the buildup of air assets, troop assets along the Polish border with Kaliningrad, Belarus, and also Ukraine as well. So there is a move to build up assets and troops along this area. So that could mean peacekeeping forces moving into Western Ukraine to squat, along with a potential no-fly zone. Is this NATO's final card? Because the military victory doesn't look like it's on the cards.
Short of nuclear, it seems like the final card.
Well, who wants nuclear annihilation?
Indeed.
So we're just putting this out there as a potential possibility, and we think people should consider it.
Okay, so Vanessa, while all this is going on in Eastern Europe, of course, in the Middle East, the pivot towards Russia and China seems to continue.
Yeah, I mean, sort of extraordinary events happening at warp speed, particularly in Syria. Syria seems to be the hub of these events from which all these new cooperations and collaborations are radiating. So I'm going to just quickly go through what's happened this week, because even in 1 week, there's been a huge amount going on here. So first of all, as you pointed out, Mike, here is, I would say, this is Russia and Iran putting pressure on Syria, and particularly on the president himself, President Bashar al-Assad, to follow through on meetings with President Erdogan. Of course, we're nearing elections in May, so time is running out. And of course, as mentioned in this excellent article up at the Cradle by Seda Karan, a Turkish-based journalist and analyst, I recommend everybody read it, because it doesn't only talk about the Syria issue, it talks about the entire election issue and the ramifications if Erdogan is elected or not in Turkey itself. And if we just go forward, Mike, we can see what she points out, which I totally agree with. She points out that the relations between Russia and Syria remain two of the thorniest issues for Ankara, particularly for Erdogan, because what this does is to place Turkey in the crosshairs of Washington's main foreign policy goals, which, of course, is the destabilization of Syria and regime change, and annexation of Syrian territory, theft of resources, etc. Turkey depends on Russia for energy and tourism. I'll come on to this in the next slide also. While Russia needs Turkey to mitigate the impact of US sanctions by receiving energy and agricultural resources and selling on into Europe. Erdogan signaled a willingness to reconcile with Assad last November, which was a complete about-turn from his original policies from 2011 onwards. But the issue has not progressed much further, despite high-level meetings between their officials under Russian mediation. Turkish and Syrian defense ministers met in Moscow in December 2022, and respective deputy foreign ministers briefly met on the 3rd and 4th of April this year. Of course, the Syrian red line, as I've been saying for some time, is to demand the evacuation of all Turkish troops from Syrian soil before rapprochement talks progress, particularly between the two presidents. Yet, in a meeting with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Shoigu, Turkish Defense Minister Hulusi Akar still claimed that Turkey's military presence in Syria was for counterterrorism, peacekeeping, and humanitarian aid. Does that sound familiar? And of course, for Turkey, it's the Kurdish issue which needs resolving. And then you have a battle between effectively two NATO member states, the US backing the Kurdish Contras and Turkey backing the terrorist Free Syrian Army, Muslim Brotherhood groups in Syria. So coming on to other events, Saudi Arabia buys Russian oil in record volumes and sells it to the European market. Now, this is interesting because this means that Saudi Arabia has potential to replace Turkey as the hub for Russian resources and the sale on into Europe to avoid Western sanctions, particularly US, UK sanctions. So this is interesting. Is Saudi Arabia now vying to take the place of Turkey? And will that have an impact on how Erdogan responds to President Assad? Interesting also that the West is doubling down on the chemical weapon narratives in Syria and following through on the corrupted and fraudulent OPCW IT report, which effectively maintains the blame on the Syrian government for the use of chemical weapons, despite the dissident OPCW inspectors' reports to the contrary. So China now is basically taking the bull by the horns and demanding that the US clarifies and provides transparency on its military and biological activities at home and abroad. And bear in mind, of course, those biolabs are on the borders of China, Iran, and Russia, not coincidentally. Today is Al-Quds Day, the last Friday of Ramadan, the Muslim festival. Al-Quds Day, meaning Jerusalem, started in Iran after the 1979 revolution, which deposed the Western-backed Shah of Iran. And so here we see a very sort of belligerent stance being taken by the various resistance groups and the unification of resistance groups. So a delegation from the Islamic Jihad movement in Palestine, headed by Secretary General Ziad al-Nakhala, arrived in the Iraqi capital, Baghdad, in response to an official invitation to participate in the activities of the International Day of Jerusalem, Al-Quds. The visit will include meetings with high-level Iraqi officials and party leaders. And in the occupied territories themselves, the various now very much armed brigades, this is something that we've not really seen. We've seen it in Gaza, but we've not seen it to such an extent in the occupied territories. So here in Jenin, the Al-Quds brigades organize a march and a military parade in Jenin camp on the occasion of Al-Quds Day. The Lion's Den brigade in Nablus has also put out a warning of Israeli attacks on the camps in Jenin and Nablus tonight, and to prepare for those. So expect violent clashes tonight. Iranian delegation in Saudi Arabia to prepare for embassy reopening, this incredible peace deal that was brokered by China, who's also obviously working on a peace deal in Ukraine. In two working groups in Riyadh and Jeddah, the Iranian delegation will take the necessary measures to set up an embassy and a consulate general, as well as the permanent representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. So here we actually see Islamic unity across Sunni and Shia Islam, which is something, of course, the West has been weaponizing along sectarian lines to prevent pan-Arabism and to prevent unity between Arab nations. Iranian oil minister Javad Alji has traveled to Venezuela to discuss ways to strengthen energy relations between the two friendly nations, according to the Latin American country's foreign ministry. And of course, here in Damascus, the Venezuelan ambassador and embassy is very active. This is one of the most extraordinary happenings that is ongoing. Of course, peace deal still being brokered between Yemen and Saudi Arabia, with Oman taking part as a mediator. Here you have Yemeni President Mahdi al-Mahsat, head of the coalition National Salvation government, which actually comprises 38 political factions from within Yemen. So it's not solely Ansarullah. It represents a majority of the political sectors in Yemen. Receives the Omani and Saudi delegations at the Republican Palace in Sana'a, Yemen. Next. And in the last few days, Foreign Minister of Syria, Faisal al-Muqdad, was in Jeddah also on a working visit at the invitation of his counterpart, Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan, to hold talks on bilateral relations between the two countries. And of course, it's worth pointing out that Saudi Arabia was instrumental in the funding and the promotion of the regime change war, waged against Syria since 2011, it stopped funding armed groups such as Jaish al-Islam, the Army of Islam, led by Zoran Aloush, who was killed in 2015, I think. And Sheikh Abdullah Mahizani, who led one of the most brutal coalitions in Syria up until 2015, 2016. So the fact that this détente is going on is quite extraordinary. So what were the main points of the meeting? First of all, cooperation to ensure that a political solution is found in Syria that protects Syrian territorial integrity, security, and stability, and Arab identity. This is important. We talked about the unification and the reemergence of pan-Arabism, and there you have it. Agreement on addressing humanitarian issues and facilitating the arrival of aid to reach all regions in Syria, not the Northwest pocket that the US, UK, and EU were focused on. Preparing the ground for the return of Syrian refugees to their regions, ending their suffering and enabling safe return to their homeland. Increasing efforts to restore stability to Syria, strengthening security, combating terrorism, and I've put in brackets that the irony is very obvious there, combating terrorism in all its forms and fostering cooperation in fighting drug smuggling and trafficking. Now, I've also put here no sanctions, just action, unlike the West, because the latest sanction, swath of sanctions against Syrian officials is based on the alleged production of Captagon, despite the fact that the West was responsible for the importation of Captagon to the armed groups from 2011 onwards. Commitment to support of Syrian state institutions and civil society to ensure control on Syrian territory, and to end the presence of armed militia and external intervention in Syrian affairs. Taking steps to achieve comprehensive political settlement of the crisis in Syria, bringing an end to all the repercussions of the conflict, including national reconciliation and amnesty, which means the reintegration of the Syrian national armed groups, as the Syrian government has been doing since 2011. Returning Syria to the Arab community, including perhaps the Arab League, and resuming its historic role in the Arab world. Both sides welcome the resumption of consular services and flights between both countries. And it's worth pointing out that today, Egypt also came out to pressure Turkey to withdraw its military and its proxy armed groups from Syria. Also, this week, Syria's rapprochement advances with Tunisia. Tunisia is sending an ambassador and reopening its embassy in Damascus, and Damascus is sending an ambassador to Tunisia, and flights will start again between the two countries. Now, how does Israel and the West view these peaceful negotiations that are going on for the benefit of the Syrian people? Of course, the Times of Israel comes out with an article on the 9th of April blaming Iran for constructing a new Middle East. Interesting use of language there, as the new Middle East was effectively the Israeli-backed vision of a partitioned, weakened, destabilized Middle East, of course, in collaboration with the US. And what's interesting in this article is that they are particularly worried about the fact that peace is now coming to Yemen, because in Israel's view, this means that Yemen also can join the resistance and train its missiles on Israeli occupied territories. Also, kind of retrospectively, Israel has come up with the excuse for aggression against Syria in the last few weeks, which has escalated on the basis that Iran has been transferring weapons into Syria under cover of earthquake aid flights. Now, of course, the irony and the projection within this statement is the fact that the US and the UK and the EU have for years been transferring weapons into Syria to the armed groups under the pretext of humanitarian aid. And the US, always on the warpath, never looking for peace. In fact, it's outraged by peace, sends its guided missile, nuclear-powered submarine to the Middle East amid alleged Iran tensions. So the deployment came amid intelligence indicating multiple potential threats by Iran and its proxies in the region, and in the region would, of course, mean against Israel. Among those threats was a potential maritime attack on Israeli-linked commercial tanker ships. Now, again, that's projection. The majority of those attacks have been carried out by Israel against Iranian ships, and I haven't found anything in Iranian media to suggest that Iran is intending such attacks. However, that's why this nuclear-powered submarine that has the potential of firing, I think it has 154 cruise missiles on board. Russia blasts the US over treatment of Lavrov. Apparently, Washington has refused flight path for the foreign minister's plane to New York so that he can attend UN events at the end of April. Anatoly Antonov, the ambassador to Washington, said on Thursday he described the clearance delay as incomprehensible. The US authorities have not yet sanctioned the arrival of the aircraft, he said. He added that Moscow expects the Americans to promptly grant the flight permission without any conditions or restrictions. So while all of these peace deals are being brokered in the Middle East, the West appears to be basically getting more and more frustrated and more demented in its policy.
Yes, and rather childish. I mean, we're seeing this kind of thing, Patrick, much more often, the denying visas to get to. I mean, the United Nations is supposed to be an international gathering. You can't deny a visa to a diplomat, no matter under any circumstances, it seems to me.
And Vladimir Putin is due to speak at the at the BRICS summit in South Africa, and now they're having to reconsider him traveling because of the arrest warrant with the International Criminal Court. So that's the highest level of sort of politicizing the international system in order to keep countries from, visiting each other, heads of state. What about the UN General Assembly? The U.S. isn't a signatory to the ICC, but is that going to be a problem going forward? Anyway, it's
nuts.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for that summary, Vanessa. That's brilliant.
And I want to add what Vanessa was mentioned about Yemen there. To see the Saudi Arabian representative meeting a representative from Ansar Allah, or the Houthis, as they call them in the West, in Oman this past week. That means that they're recognizing Sana'a as a legitimate government. And so this is the first step to really an end to this 8-year war started by Barack Hussein Obama in March of 2015.
Yes.
I think this is amazing from that point of view.
It absolutely is. And of course, that war has had virtually no media coverage over the years. It's just continued and really no observable pushback from any media in the UK or anywhere in the West.
No. So it's some good news this week.
Absolutely.
Hopefully.
Okay, let's move on. If you like what the UK Column's doing, you'd like to support us, please head over to community.ukcolumn.org. There are options for us to join us there. That'd be very much appreciated. You can pick something up at the UK Column shop, but please do share material on the various platforms, including ukcolumn.org and ukcolumnextracts.co.uk. Now, a reminder that on Tuesday, Brian's interview with Andrew Bridgen will be streamed out at 1 p.m, Tuesday, 18th of April, in the usual places. So do watch that if you possibly can. And please let everybody that you know that that's taking place. And hopefully we'll get a large audience for that one. A reminder that next on Sunday, the 23rd, just over a week's time, the virtual event, AV event, Smart Cities and Surveillance Agenda, taking place. It's a live streamed event. We're helping them live stream that, and that will in turn support the genuinely live, physically live event in November, AV 13, or I believe it is. So please take part in that on Sunday week if you possibly can. A reminder of the London rally this Saturday in Trafalgar Square, the No to ULEZ rally. Anybody wants to take part in that, turn up at Trafalgar Square 12 to 3 p.m. on Saturday the 15th. That's tomorrow. And Patrick, you're speaking the following Saturday in Trafalgar Square for the Not Our War event.
Yeah, this is going to be Niall McRae. He's a writer. You're probably familiar with his work. Anthony Weber, who's mounted a petition to stop the war, basically, and defund it, stop Britain's participation in the Ukraine proxy war. Peter Ford former British ambassador to Syria, David Clues, I believe he's from the Unity News Network, and myself. So that's next Saturday, April 22nd. There's other speakers to be announced. So they're still waiting for a few more, but in Trafalgar Square, 12 p.m., and it should go for probably about 2 hours. So looking forward to that. That should be an interesting gathering.
Okay, super. So now earlier in the week, the BBC interviewed Elon Musk. Now we're going to show a couple of clips from this to set up the main part, which is to look at one or two of the organizations that were mentioned during this this particular interview. But let's just listen to the first clip of Elon Musk.
Free speech is meaningless unless you allow people you don't like to say things you don't like. Otherwise, it's irrelevant. And if at the point at which you lose free speech, it doesn't come back.
I think the issue some people have is that a lot of people were brought back. I mean, some people were brought back who were previously banned for spreading things like QAnon conspiracies. You have people like Andrew Tate who were brought back, who were previously banned for things like hate speech. Do you think you prioritize freedom of speech over misinformation and hate speech?
Well, you know, who's to say that something is misinformation? Who's the arbiter of that? Is it the BBC?
You're literally asking me?
Yes.
Well, no, you are the arbiter on Twitter, because you own Twitter.
Yes, I'm saying who is to say that one person's misinformation is another person's information? At the point at which you say that there is this is misinformation, like who is going to decide that?
You accept that misinformation can be dangerous, that it can cause real-world harms, that it can potentially cause...
Yes, so the point I'm trying to make is that the BBC itself has, at times, published things that are false. Do you agree that that has occurred?
I'm quite sure the BBC have said things before that turn out to not be true.
Right.
In its, whatever it is, 100-year history, I'm quite sure.
Yes. Even if you aspire to be accurate, there are times when you will not be.
So, I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, it's interesting exchange, and it's about to get more interesting, I think.
Well, it is. Now, let's look at the second clip then.
Spoken to people very recently who were involved in moderation, and they just say there's not enough people to police this stuff, particularly around hate speech in the company. Is that
what hate
that
speech are you talking about? I mean, you use Twitter,
right?
Do you see a rise in hate speech?
I mean,
but just a personal anecdote, like what do you? I don't.
Personally, my for you, I would see I get more of that kind of content, yeah, personally. But I'm not going to talk to the rest of for the rest of Twitter.
So you see more hate speech personally?
I would say I would see more hateful content in that.
Content you don't like or hateful? What do you mean to describe a hateful thing?
Yeah, I mean, you know, just content that will solicit a reaction, something that may include something that is slightly racist or slightly sexist, those kinds of things.
So you think if something is slightly sexist, it should be banned?
There are many organizations that say that kind of information is on the rise. Now, whether it has on my feed or not. I mean, right, and
literally
if you look at something
one.
like the Strategic Dialogue Institute in the UK, they will say that. So
look, people will say all sorts of nonsense. I'm literally asking for a single example, and you can't name one.
Right, and as I already said, I don't use that feed. But
then how would you know that?
I don't think this is getting anywhere.
You literally said you experienced more hateful content, and then couldn't name a single example.
Right, and as I said,
that's absurd.
I haven't actually looked at that feed.
Then how would you know there's hateful content?
Because I'm saying that's what I saw a few weeks ago. I can't give you an exact example. Let's move on.
And of course, at that point, he wants to move on. Vanessa, we're going to talk about the Institute for Strategic Dialogue in a second, but just what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, it's embarrassing. Is this the best the BBC has got, for heaven's sake? I mean, it's not. He's not a journalist. What is he? I mean, he was. I mean, it's not difficult to have this conversation with Elon Musk, right? But who is this guy?
Well, we'll come on to that. We'll come on to that shortly. But let's talk about the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, which actually he didn't seem to know the name of because he called it the Strategic Dialogue Institute. But anyway, this is them. They have a website. What are their top stories that they're focusing on at the moment? They've got a series on the January 6th sit coup, if you want, as they call it.
Quote, insurrection.
The insurrection.
Right.
Then they're obviously talking about Elon Musk and before and after Twitter, acquiring Twitter. The Reichsbürger movement, we've mentioned them in the past, and then the Russian invasion of Ukraine. These are their top sort of subjects on their website. They're all about powering solutions to extremism, hate, and disinformation. Patrick, that's their headline there. So this is what they say about themselves. ISD partners with governments, cities, businesses, and communities working to deliver solutions at all levels of society to empower those that can really impact change. We are headquartered in London with a global footprint that includes teams in Washington, D.C., Berlin, Amman, Nairobi, and Paris. They focus on these three areas. First of all, analysis. They say we combine sector-leading expertise and research in global extremist movements with an advanced digital analysis capability. With this, we identify and track online manipulation, disinformation, hate, and extremism in real time. Our digital analysis unit has built proprietary tools for delivering social science standards of data. This provides ISD and our partners with granular insights into the evolving actors, tactics, technologies, audiences involved in proliferating hate, disinformation, and extremism online. So they are collecting bulk data. They're looking at who's spreading information which they consider disinformation, which they consider hate, or which they consider extremist. And then they're using that analysis to inform everybody, really, that's on the official side of the narrative.
So they're tracking dissident speech. So this is the same sort of canard that, Kate Starbird at the University of Washington and all these academic working groups. Why do they have an office in Amman? Is it to tamp down pro-Palestinian speech on Jordanian social media? I don't know. But it seems like they will always position themselves with whatever the British government considers to be dissident or hateful or threatening. And that's it. Whatever NATO or the British government, that's where you'll see the Institute for Strategic Dialogue will be exactly aligned with that. Just like the Southern Poverty Law Center in the United States, and the ADL, Anti-Defamation League, performing pretty much the same function, but this one is more geopolitical, this institute.
So analysis was their first one. Action is their second. So here we go. Action, we design and deliver programs that empower cities, practitioners, and civil society around the world to mitigate hate, polarization, and disinformation. So now they're not pushing analysis into governments. Now they're pushing action points into the city-states, as we're seeing them built around the world, at least the Western world, and into civil society, third sector organizations, NGOs, charities, and so on.
Smart cities.
Our Strong Cities network has delivered training to 5,000 practitioners, brackets police officers, teachers, and youth workers around the world. So they've got a 3-minute video on it.
Training, it sounds like common purpose.
This is exactly what it is, of a type. Crucially, we work to empower civil society, fostering networks of community influencers. So fostering networks of community influencers, just think about that, including the first and largest global network of former extremists, they claim, that have credibility to reach hard-to-reach target audiences. We've trained over 32,000 activists and social influencers around the world. How many of them are on YouTube, for example? That would be my question.
Good question.
Right? And have pioneered first of their kind intervention models across several different online spaces, gaming, social media, all tech platforms. Gaming connections, once again, here, Patrick.
Ooh, the gamers, yes.
Right, so we're back to the gamers again. Right. So that's their actions. Finally, policy. We formulate and advocate policy solutions and provide local authorities, central governments, and multilateral institutions with the data, expertise, and technical support to deliver evidence-based policy and programming. And Strong Cities Network is absolutely part and parcel of that. This organization is at the core of much of the propaganda that we're seeing. It's there to counter the so-called disinformation of anybody that's pushing any kind of narrative or information which would be counter to their policy agenda. And just to give one example, because they work very, very closely with the BBC. So here's another example. UK registered media company likely informationing likely, they say, information laundering for Russia. So ISD's executive director teamed up with the BBC to look into Yalla News, a UK-registered media company that appears to be spreading mirrored video versions of Russian state media propaganda stories. Now, this is Yalla News is pushing this out in Arabic-speaking countries on Facebook, via Facebook and other social media platforms. But again, we have this organization working very closely hand in hand with the BBC to attempt to counter what they're describing as information laundering for Russia. So again, we're accusing others of doing what they're doing because they're running the information laundering campaigns, it seems.
So if any Arabic language media outlets happen to have the same editorial viewpoint as a Russian media outlet, then they're mirroring Russian disinformation,
right?
Mirroring Russian propaganda. So this is completely politicized. This is, again, to dovetail with whatever the British, NATO, or U.S. Foreign policy is of the day. That's all this is. They're providing support for in the information warfare space.
Yes.
Next generation warfare. That's what this looks like.
Absolutely. Now, they were hand in hand with not only the BBC, but also with the Integrity Initiative and the Institute for Statecraft, if you remember what that was, which was pushing anti-Russian narratives, anti-Russian propaganda through the mainstream press and a whole host of other organizations. And I believe it was the 7th leak of the information that was lifted from the Integrity Initiative website included information about this organization, the Zinc Network. Now, this was the Zinc Network was set up a number of years ago. We'll just have a brief look at who their clients and partners are and were. I think this particular screenshot is from their version of their website from 2020. And so we've got the Home Office, Foreign Commonwealth Office, as it was then, the Department for Education, Department of Health, Ministry of Justice. Then we've got USAID. And then we've got Democracy Council. We've got the European Union in there. We've got the World Health Organization in there. We've got KPMG, the Rockefeller Foundation, King's College London, London School of Economics, NSPCC.
A veritable rogues gallery, Mike.
Australian government, okay, all involved with the Zinc Network. But back in 2018, the Zinc Network attempted to set up what was called the Expose Network. This was a massive network of NGOs. They produced this technical proposal, and the Institute for Strategic Dialogue was part and parcel of this network. And although they're not in the consortium partners list, they were in a list of 40 or 50 organizations. It was going to be set up, described as the Expose Network. 3 directors were going to be set up for the Expose Network. Chris Donnelly from the Institute for Statecraft Integrity Initiative, Emil Khan of Chatham House, and Lewis Brooke of the Zinc Network. And it was going to get, or at least they were bidding from the Foreign Commonwealth Office, just under £10 million for the budget for this. Institute for Strategic Dialogue, absolutely in this little network at the time.
Consortium partners, Mike, who's that down in the lower left-hand corner there?
Indeed, if we just put that back on screen for a second, Bellingcat.
Bellingcat, oh, it's interesting. So that ties them in with the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. And there's a few other interesting, the Digital Forensic Research Lab, DFR Labs. Isn't that, hold on, the Atlantic Council.
It is.
Isn't that interesting? A NATO think tank. So they're all in there, thick like thieves, aren't they?
Okay, so the question, yes. So then the question is, what's this all about? Well, of course, the problem with what Elon Musk is doing with Twitter at the moment, he's letting all kinds of rogues back on there, like 21 Wire, for example.
Oh, terrible people.
Terrible people like that. And so the problem is that the government is, in a sense, losing control of that particular organization. And why am I mentioning this? Well, of course, the online safety bill is going through House of Lords at the moment. It's still a committee stage. They've been trying to get this piece of legislation through the books for several years now. It's not making any progress. It hasn't made any progress. They've already had to drop the legal but harmful clause from it. So what the British government has done instead is to try to move the censorship, the obligation to censor content, back onto the social media companies through their terms and conditions. So what they're saying to the social media companies is, right, you've got to enforce your terms and conditions where you have them. And if you don't enforce them, you're going to be subject to massive fines and or jail time.
That's what Germany is doing.
Right, and that's what we're all doing. So it's pushing the obligation for the censorship back on the terms and conditions. And if Elon Musk is effectively ripping up his terms and conditions, is saying, actually, you can talk about COVID, you can talk about vaccine injuries, you can talk about the war in Ukraine, which is what seems to be happening, then it's going to be very difficult for governments to cause Twitter to enforce terms and conditions that don't exist.
Because they'll end up in court fighting over defining what is harmful or defining what is disinformation. And, you know, the corporate side is going to win every time, Mike, because they're not compelled to have to make new definitions for words or things like that. If it's not illegal, exposed as a complete hack journalist, James Clayton. I mean, he went in there
let's bring him on screen.
To set up a hit job and completely failed.
Yes, so James Clayton is the BBC's North America tech reporter. I try to explain tech clearly and simply, he says on his Twitter account, based in San Francisco, formerly BBC Newsnight. So, you know, I don't know, is this career ending for him? He
lied during the interview. He lied about all the extreme hate in his For You feed, and he couldn't name an example. So he was lying on camera to the richest guy in the world who owns Twitter and thinks he's going to sort of scurry away and get away with that.
Yeah.
This could be a devastating career fail for James Clayton. But Mike, but in the world of the BBC and the mainstream media, this may actually get you promoted, or even land you a job in charge of something like Ofcom. Okay, so actually, if he wants to, for the deep state, big career opportunities are waiting for James Clayton right now. He's proved that he can go into the lion's den and lie and get away with it and have no shame whatsoever. I think he's got a promising future.
Vanessa.
Wasn't Olivia Solon originally reporting from San Francisco on tech issues?
Yep.
Maybe San Francisco is the new pool for fall guy journalists that are going to kind of impale themselves on various narrative untruths from the BBC and The Guardian. That made me laugh, because I think she was.
Well, indeed. So riding to the rescue then of a potential failed career is Mariana Spring, of course. After Musk's interview with the BBC, a reminder of this panorama investigation I did. Twitter insiders told me under Musk site is no longer able to protect users from trolling and other harm. Exclusive data and users' testimony suggests hate is thriving. So she's attempting to provide some foundations for a collapsing journalistic career. But here she's also saying, also a reminder of how when Musk tweeted about the investigation, it unleashed a torrent of abuse against me from trolls. Poor Mariana. There you go. It proved what I'd revealed about the site struggling to protect users. More on being at the center of a Twitter troll storm there. So there you go.
So she's the British equivalent of Nina Jankovic.
Yes.
There, and she's expecting they're going to throw her flower garlands and praise for the job that she's doing as head of the Ministry of Truth. Okay.
And then this morning she was retweeting that over Easter she was away before venturing into conspiracy land for the next Radio 4 podcast. So it's such a terrible life for her. But Patrick, what is the myth of the BBC?
Well, I was going to comment on Mariana Spring, but
yeah, do that.
Well, look, she downplays the Twitter files and said that somehow this is some nefarious operation by Elon Musk to discredit legitimate disinformation experts or whatever. That's the story. That's the story. But it undermines her whole job and her whole position and this fake new industry of fact checkers and disinformation experts, total hacks, complete frauds. The whole section of this part of the media that's been carved out for these people is a complete fraud. And everyone's starting to see that now. And so I'm waiting, when are these people going to jump ship? They have no credibility left. I mean, unless you think that holding an esteemed position within the Reich's media hierarchy, or Stalin's Russia or something, is something to aspire to as a career person. Suleiman Ahmed is a really good independent journalist. He wrote an amazing thread on Twitter. I'm sorry we don't have it up on screen, but he broke down Mariana Spring's article, point by point, this exhaustive thread. And it's an amazing forensic example of how you can deconstruct these so-called disinformation experts as complete propaganda hacks. And she is absolutely that. So anyway.
Oh, okay. Well, as we mentioned on Wednesday's program, of course, Musk also announced that they were going to change the little tagline that goes to the BBC from government-funded media outlet to public-funded media outlet. But tell us about the myth of a public service.
Well, we've had this conversation many times on the UK column over the years, and this is a good book here by Tom Mills, the BBC, The Myth of a Public Service, and it goes into the detail of how the BBC is actually under the thumb of the state. That's what they do. And so they are an expression of establishment, and they have always been that, and that's their whole role, period. So that's an important thing. The other thing is NPR and PBS, I think, have jumped ship from Twitter out of protest because of this hassle of being called state-funded media, even though they're actually funded by the state. In protest, they're leaving Twitter. They made this big announcement, and I don't see anybody shedding any serious tears. I don't know where they're going to go after this, maybe Mastodon or something like that.
Who knows? Well, okay, let's just remind everybody that it's only a week or so until the UK government will be testing the emergency alert system across the UK. This is their new way to alert us when our lives may be in danger, because we've got to pump the fear out. That's on the 23rd of April, 2023. Well, now we know what time it's at. It's going to be at 3 p.m. So there you go. This is what they had to say. Emergency alerts will transform the UK's warning and informing capability by working with mobile broadcasting technology. It will provide a means to get urgent messages quickly to nearly 90% of mobile phones in a defined area where there's a risk to life, and provide clear instructions about how best to respond. So they're saying that this will go out on 4G and 5G mobile phones with sound and vibration. Now, the last time we reported this, we played the little video clip that let everybody hear what it's going to sound like, so you don't have to actually have it enabled on your phone. So they're going to test this, as we say, at 3 p.m. on Sunday, the 23rd of April. Following successful pilots in East Suffolk and Reading, this new emergency alert system will see people receive a message on the home screen of their mobile phone, along with a sound and vibration for up to 10 seconds.
It'll be very loud. It's not something you can disable or anything like that.
Oh, it is something you can disable. So we're just about to explain how you disable it. So here we go. So remember, it's if you've got a phone running iOS 14, sorry, we'll just go back, iOS 14.5 or later, Anyway, you can opt out of emergency alerts, but you must keep them switched on for your own, you should keep them switched on for your own safety. To opt out, you can search settings for emergency alerts. You can turn off severe alerts and extreme alerts. So there's two levels of alert. But you need to have a more modern phone, basically, for it to work at all.
So if you've got an old Nokia Banana, dog whistle to the Neo-Luddites, right?
Yes.
They're cool. They're not going to be bothered by this. It could trigger you. What if you're driving and this thing goes, we have this in Arizona for dust storms. It goes, and the phone shakes.
Yes.
It's not pleasant.
No.
Now, if you're easily triggered or you have anxiety issues, this is going to trigger you. Why are they going to do, what could this possibly be for, Mike? How did the British survive all these centuries without the emergency alert system?
Well, Patrick, the thing is, if Putin launches his nuclear barrage, we've got to be told to get under the tables. I mean, how else are they going to tell us?
Do you think it's possible the government may start doing drills with this?
Well, this is the first one.
This technology?
Yes.
Mock nuclear drills? Do you think that's a possibility?
I think it very much is.
We also have extreme heat. That happens 2 days a year.
Yes.
And everyone freaks out in the tabloids, say it's a Armageddon, right?
And
you can do that. And what about cold, extreme cold, 1 day a year? And rain.
And don't forget, there'll be more variants of COVID and coronavirus and more avian flu and all kinds of stuff. Who knows?
Perfect for a new variant.
Yes.
A new variant has been spotted in your area, the Kent variant or the Arcturus. So I can see there's so much potential for this, Mike. This is really exciting. We should be getting excited about this. Total social engineering in real time. Everyone gets triggered at the same time.
Yes.
This is fantastic.
Let's move on to another form of social engineering then, just to finish off. Bud Light.
Yeah, that's right, Bud Light. So when they signed this bloke who believes or pretends to be a woman, their share prices have dropped. They've lost $6 billion off the value of their company. And Wall Street experts are saying that's nothing compared to the drop that's coming on Monday. Possibly another dip for Anheuser-Busch. That's the biggest brewery in America. They've gone full trans on this. They put this guy's picture on the beer can as well.
Yes.
There's been a huge backlash. Everyone's boycotting Anheuser-Busch products. And look at this. Go woke, go broke. That's what they say, right?
Now that became a hashtag on Twitter very, very quickly.
Yes, Dylan Mulvaney. Yes, what were they possibly thinking? So Nike's having the same issue.
Exactly, because it's not just Bud Light. It's a whole raft of companies have chosen this particular person to promote their product.
So they got men wearing women's bras, and so there's women are having this campaign, burn the bra. I think it's against Nike. So the whole thing's backfiring on all these companies. So this is amazing news. I think this is something to celebrate because isn't it ridiculous? They can't find a decent woman to be the face of these companies, so they have to go find a guy who's pretending to be a woman. I mean, what kind of times are we living in? This is just complete Sodom and Gomorrah.
It is indeed. And on that note, we'll leave it for today. Thank you very much to Vanessa and Patrick for joining us. We'll be back in a few minutes for some extra. But otherwise, have a good weekend, and we'll see you at 1 p.m. on Monday as usual. See you then. Bye-bye.